When you first encounter the Leyat Hélica, it feels less like discovering a car and more like stumbling across an alternate timeline where automotive engineering followed a completely different path. At a glance, it has wheels, a body, and space for passengers, which technically qualifies it as a car, but that illusion disappears the moment your eyes settle on the front, where instead of a grille or radiator, there is a large propeller mounted proudly and unapologetically as if it belongs there. It's the kind of detail that forces you to stop and rethink everything you thought you understood about early vehicles, because this machine does not simply bend the rules, it ignores them entirely and replaces them with its own logic. The origin of this unusual creation can be traced back to Marcel Leyat, an aviation engineer who approached automotive design from a completely different perspective. Unlike traditional car designers of the early 20th century who focused on refining existing mechanical systems, Leyat saw inefficiency in almost every aspect of the automobile. He looked at heavy drivetrains, complex gearboxes, and energy losses through friction, and instead of improving them step by step, he asked a far more radical question: what if none of those systems were necessary in the first place? Coming from the world of aircraft, where weight reduction and aerodynamic efficiency were critical, his thinking naturally led him toward a simpler and more direct solution, one that removed as many mechanical components as possible and relied on air itself as the driving force. That idea became the foundation of the Hélica. Instead of transmitting power to the wheels through gears and shafts, the engine was connected directly to a propeller, which generated thrust and pushed the vehicle forward. It was a concept that eliminated the need for a traditional drivetrain entirely, reducing both weight and mechanical complexity in a single move. Early versions of the 1921 model were typically powered by a small air-cooled flat twin engine, often an ABC unit producing around 8 horsepower, while later variants experimented with larger engines, including V-twin configurations that increased output to roughly 18 horsepower. On paper, those numbers seem modest, especially by modern standards, but in the context of the Hélica's extremely lightweight construction, they were more than sufficient to produce meaningful performance. The secret to making such low power viable was weight reduction. The body of the Hélica was constructed primarily from plywood, forming a lightweight monocoque structure that weighed in the range of about 550 pounds. This made it dramatically lighter than most automobiles of its time, and even lighter than many vehicles today. Combined with its narrow, streamlined shape, which closely resembled the fuselage of an aircraft, the design minimized aerodynamic drag and allowed the car to move efficiently through the air. Passengers were seated in tandem, one behind the other, a layout that further reduced frontal area and reinforced the aircraft-inspired philosophy that defined the entire project. Driving the Hélica was a completely different experience from operating a conventional car, not only because of the propulsion system, but also because of the way it handled. One of the most unusual aspects was the steering configuration, where the rear wheels were responsible for directional control while the front wheels remained fixed. This reversed arrangement created a unique dynamic that required adaptation from the driver, especially at higher speeds where stability became more sensitive. Instead of the predictable behavior of front-wheel steering, the Hélica demanded anticipation and a steady hand, particularly when combined with the constant thrust generated by the propeller. The suspension system followed the same minimalist philosophy, focusing on reducing weight while maintaining basic functionality. Independent elements were used in combination with narrow wheels, which helped lower rolling resistance and contributed to the vehicle's efficiency. Comfort was not the primary goal, and it likely felt firm and direct on uneven surfaces, but it was adequate for a machine that was never intended to provide luxury. Instead, the emphasis was on maintaining control and efficiency while keeping the overall structure as light as possible. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Hélica is how it interacted with its environment.
Unlike traditional cars, whose performance is largely independent of external air movement, the Hélica was directly influenced by wind conditions. A headwind could reduce its effectiveness, while a tailwind could enhance its performance, creating a driving experience that felt more like piloting than driving. Crosswinds, in particular, could introduce additional challenges, especially given the vehicle's lightweight construction and narrow profile. This meant that operating the Hélica required constant awareness, as the driver had to respond not only to the road, but also to the air itself.
Acceleration in the Hélica also differed from conventional expectations. Because propulsion was generated through thrust rather than torque applied to the wheels, the vehicle did not exhibit the same immediate response at low speeds. Instead, it built momentum gradually, in a smooth and continuous manner, similar to an aircraft beginning its takeoff roll. Once in motion, however, the combination of low weight and aerodynamic efficiency allowed it to maintain speed with surprising ease, and later versions were even capable of reaching speeds well above 60 miles per hour, with experimental models achieving over 100 miles per hour under favorable conditions. Inside the vehicle, the experience continued to reflect its aviation roots. The tandem seating arrangement created a cockpit-like environment, where the driver and passenger were aligned rather than seated side by side. Controls were simple and functional, with no unnecessary complexity, and visibility was generally good due to the narrow body and large openings. There was no sense of luxury in the traditional automotive sense, but there was a clear sense of purpose, as every element of the interior served a specific function within the overall design. Of course, the Hélica was not without its drawbacks, and some of them were impossible to ignore. The most obvious concern was safety, particularly the presence of a large, spinning propeller at the front of the vehicle. While some versions included protective meshes, the inherent risk remained, especially in populated areas. Additionally, the absence of a reverse gear meant that maneuvering in tight spaces required manual effort, as the vehicle had to be physically pushed backward when needed. These limitations, combined with its unconventional handling characteristics, made it less practical for everyday use compared to more traditional automobiles.
Despite these challenges, Marcel Leyat managed to produce a small number of Hélica vehicles between 1919 and 1925, with estimates suggesting that around 25 to 30 units were built. This limited production reflects both the experimental nature of the design and the niche appeal it held among buyers. Those who chose to own a Hélica were not simply purchasing transportation, they were investing in an idea, a different vision of how a vehicle could function. Today, the surviving examples of the Leyat Hélica are preserved in museums and collections, where they serve as reminders of a time when the future of transportation was still uncertain and open to interpretation. Institutions such as the Musée des Arts et Métiers in Paris and the Leuven Museum in the Netherlands display these vehicles as pieces of engineering history, highlighting their unique approach and the bold thinking behind their creation. Seeing one in person offers a perspective that photographs cannot fully capture, as the scale, proportions, and presence of the propeller create an impression that is both unusual and unforgettable. Ultimately, the Hélica stands as more than just an unconventional vehicle. It represents a moment in history when innovation was driven by curiosity and the willingness to challenge established norms. It shows what can happen when an engineer steps outside the boundaries of their field and applies a completely different set of principles to a familiar problem. While the concept did not become a mainstream solution, it contributed to the broader understanding of efficiency, aerodynamics, and design simplicity, leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire interest and discussion.
In the end, the significance of the Hélica does not lie in its practicality or commercial success, but in its ability to provoke thought and expand the definition of what a vehicle can be. It reminds us that progress is not always a straight line, and that some of the most interesting ideas come from those who are willing to question everything and explore possibilities that others might consider too unconventional to pursue. And if you enjoy discovering machines like this, rare, unusual, and far ahead of their time, make sure to subscribe to the channel because there are many more forgotten and fascinating vehicles coming your way.